The desert wind carried the scent of death across the broken landscape. Thomas McKenna squinted against the harsh afternoon sun, his weathered hands steady on the reins of his sorrel mare. For 3 days, he had been tracking the raiders who had struck the settlement at Willow Creek, leaving behind burned wagons and scattered belongings like broken dreams across the alkali flats. McKenna was not a man who sought trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him in this unforgiving territory. At 42, he had spent most of his adult life moving through the vast spaces between civilization and wilderness, carrying mail, supplies, and sometimes messages that decent folks prefer not to speak aloud. His face bore the permanent squint lines of a man who had learned to read the horizon like other men read newspapers. The sound reached him before the sight did, a low keening, almost lost in the constant whisper of wind through sagebrush. McKenna pulled his mare to a halt and listened. There was again, human and full of pain. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip, though he kept the weapon holstered. In this country, you survive by being prepared, not by being quick to shoot. Following the sound led him up a rocky rise where stunted juniper trees clung to the thin soil like desperate fingers. At the base of a red sandstone outcropping, he found them. 3 men, their horses ground-tied nearby, standing over a figure on the ground. Even from a distance, McKenna could see these were not the raiders he had been tracking. These men wore the rough clothing of drifters, the kind who move from town to town, always one step ahead of trouble. The figure on the ground was a woman, and she was Apache. McKenna had learned long ago to assess situations quickly and act decisively. The woman was young, probably not much past 20, with the traditional dress and ornaments of her people. Her dark hair had come loose from its bindings and spread across the rocky ground. One of the men held a length of rope, while another kept glancing nervously at the surrounding terrain. The third man, clearly the leader, was speaking in low, urgent tones. "Just tie her up proper and let's get moving," the leader was saying as McKenna moved closer, using the rocks and sparse vegetation for cover. "We can decide what to do with her once we make camp." "Maybe we should just leave her," said the nervous one. "Apache woman means Apache trouble. You know how they are about their own. She's worth something to the right buyers down in Mexico," the leader replied. "Besides, look at her. Pretty as a picture, even if she is a savage." McKenna had seen enough. He led his mare quietly around to a position that would give him the advantage of higher ground and better cover. The Colt came out of its holster with practiced silence. He had no love for the Apache people, who had been raiding and fighting in this territory for longer than most men could remember. But he had even less love for men who would abuse a helpless woman, regardless of her tribe. "Gentlemen," McKenna called out, his voice carrying clearly across the rocky space. "I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." The 3 men spun around, hands reaching for weapons. The leader, a thick-set man with a tobacco-stained beard, already had his pistol half drawn. McKenna's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun clattering across the rocks. "Next shot won't be so friendly," McKenna announced, keeping his Colt trained on the remaining 2 men. "You boys look like you're smart enough to know when the odds have turned against you." The nervous man raised his hands immediately. "We don't want no trouble, mister. I can see what you were just doing." McKenna cut him off. "Now you're going to mount up and ride away. All 3 of you. And if I see your faces again in this territory, I won't be feeling so generous." The wounded leader clutched his bleeding shoulder and glared at McKenna with unconcealed hatred. "You know what that is?" he spat, nodding toward the woman on the ground. "That's an Apache. They'd stake you out over an anthill for the fun of it." "Maybe so," McKenna replied calmly. "But I'm not dealing with a tribe right now. I'm dealing with 3 men who are about to do something that would shame their mothers, if they have any. Now get moving." It took several tense minutes, but the 3 men finally gathered their belongings and mounted their horses. The leader needed help getting into his saddle, cursing and bleeding as his companions assisted him. McKenna kept his gun drawn until they had ridden out of sight beyond a distant ridge. Only then, did he turn his attention to the Apache woman. She had regained consciousness during the confrontation, though she had been wise enough to remain still and silent. Now, she sat up slowly, her dark eyes watching McKenna with a mixture of wariness and calculation. She was indeed young and strikingly beautiful, with the fine bone structure and copper skin of her people. Her traditional dress was torn in several places, and there were cuts and bruises on her arms and face, but she seemed otherwise uninjured. McKenna holstered his Colt and approached carefully, keeping his hands visible and his movements slow and unthreatening. The woman spoke first, surprising him. "You are not cavalry," she said in English that was accented but clear. "Why do you help me?" "Didn't seem right, what they were planning," McKenna replied simply. He gestured toward her injuries. "Are you hurt badly?" She tested her arms and legs carefully before answering. "I will live, but I am far from my people." She looked around at the desolate landscape as if seeing it for the first time. Very far. McKenna found himself studying her face, trying to read the thoughts behind those intelligent, dark eyes. Most Apache he had encountered spoke little or no English, and fewer still would admit it if they did. This woman was different, educated somehow, though he could not imagine how or where. "How did you come to be here?" he asked. The woman was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of sadness that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. "I was taken," she said simply. 3 days ago, men came to our camp while the warriors were hunting. They killed the old ones who could not run. They took the young women." Her voice became harder. "I was the only one who escaped." McKenna felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How many were there?" 8 men. Maybe 9. They had good horses and new rifles. She looked at him directly. "They were not like the 3 you frightened away. These were hunters of people." The description matched what McKenna had seen at Willow Creek. Professional raiders, well-equipped and organized. The kind who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it before. But something about the woman's story troubled him. "If you escaped," he said carefully, "why are you still here? This is a long way from Apache territory." The woman's composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of fear before she regained control. "I became lost. In the darkness, fleeing, I chose the wrong direction. When the sun rose, I did not recognize the land." She gestured helplessly at the surrounding desert. "I have been walking for 2 days, looking for water, for any sign of the way home." McKenna looked around at the harsh landscape, trying to imagine a young woman alone in this vastness. The nearest water he knew of was a full day's ride to the north, and the closest Apache settlements were even farther. Without water, she would not have lasted another day. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated again, as if the question contained hidden dangers. Among many Indian tribes, revealing one's true name to a stranger carried spiritual significance, often considered dangerous. But after a moment, she answered, "I am called Ayana. It means eternal blossom." She studied his face. "Where are you called?" "Thomas McKenna. Most folks just call me McKenna." "McKenna," she repeated, as if testing how the name felt on her tongue. "This is an Irish name, yes? My mother told me of the Irish. She said they were like Apache, driven from their homeland by stronger enemies." McKenna was surprised by her knowledge. "Your mother was a wise woman. How did she come to know of the Irish?" "She worked for a time in the household of the Indian agent at San Carlos. She learned many things there, including English. She taught me." Ayana's expression darkened. She said it was important to understand the white man's tongue, to know what they planned for our people. The mention of San Carlos explained much. The reservation was a place where many Apache had been forced to live under government supervision, often in conditions that were barely tolerable. It was also a place where some Apache learned to navigate between 2 worlds, acquiring skills that helped them survive in an increasingly complex and hostile environment. McKenna made a decision that surprised him with its swiftness. "You can't stay here," he said, "and you can't make it back to your people alone. I can take you north to the trading post at Cedar Springs." There's sometimes Apache there, trading horses and hides. Maybe someone will know your band and can help you get home. Ayanna studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to read his true intentions. Why would you do this? Your people and mine are enemies. I don't have any quarrel with you, McKenna replied. And leaving you here to die isn't something I could live with. She nodded slowly, as if this explanation satisfied some internal standard of logic. I will come with you to this trading post. But I must warn you, McKenna with the Irish name, my people will not understand why a white man helps an Apache woman. And your people will not understand either. This kindness you offer may bring danger to both of us. McKenna had already considered this possibility, but something about the young woman's dignity and intelligence had touched something in him that he had thought long buried. Perhaps it was the way she faced her desperate situation without begging or pleading. Perhaps it was the obvious education and quick mind that shone through her careful English. Or perhaps it was simply that in all his years of wandering between civilization and wilderness, he had rarely encountered anyone, white or Indian, who seemed so completely themselves, undaunted by circumstances that would have broken many others. I've been in danger before, he said simply. Come on, we need to get moving if we want to make water before dark. McKenna helped her to his horse, and she swung up behind him with the easy grace of someone who had been riding since childhood. As they started north across the broken country, he found himself acutely aware of her presence behind him, her hands resting lightly on his waist for balance. The afternoon wore on in relative silence, broken only by occasional directions or warnings about rough terrain. McKenna found himself stealing glances back at his passenger, noting how she constantly scanned the horizon and landscape around them, reading the country with the same intensity he had learned to apply. She was not simply along for the ride. She was actively participating in their survival, watching for signs of danger or opportunity that he might miss. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, they created a rise and saw the thin line of green that marked a seasonal creek still running with snowmelt from the high country. McKenna guided the mare down toward the water, relieved to find that his memory of the country had served them well. They made camp in a sheltered spot where a bend in the creek had created a small grove of cottonwood trees. McKenna tended to the horse while Ayanna gathered wood for a fire, moving through the tasks with an efficiency that spoke of long experience with traveling and camping in harsh country. As darkness settled around their small fire, they shared the jerked meat and hardtack that McKenna carried in his saddlebags. The meal was simple, but both were hungry enough that it tasted better than many elaborate dinners McKenna had eaten in more civilized circumstances. Tell me about this trading post, Ayanna said as they finished eating. What manner of man runs it? Name's Dutch Hendricks, McKenna replied, feeding another stick to the fire. He's been there about 5 years now. Fair dealer, mostly honest, and he's got sense enough not to take sides in other people's fights. Apache, Mexican, white settlers, even some of the cavalry boys trade with him when they need supplies. And he will not object to helping an Apache woman. McKenna considered the question carefully. Dutch was practical above all else, more interested in profitable trading relationships than in taking political stands. But the presence of a young Apache woman traveling with a white man would certainly complicate any visit to the trading post. Dutch will be curious, McKenna admitted, and there may be others there who won't be as understanding. But it's still the best chance of finding someone who can help you get back to your people. Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. In my band, there's an old man named Gray Wolf who sometimes trades the white man's posts. If he is there, or if someone knows of him, perhaps. She let the sentence trail off, but McKenna could hear the hope in her voice. They talked quietly for another hour as the fire burned down to glowing coals. McKenna learned that Ayanna was indeed educated beyond what was common among her people, having spent 2 years at the mission school near San Carlos before her family took her away. She spoke not only English, but Spanish and some French, learned from a Mexican priest who had taken an interest in her quick mind and eagerness to learn. For her part, Ayanna seemed genuinely curious about McKenna's background and his reasons for living alone in such an isolated and dangerous territory. He found himself telling her about his early life in Colorado, his years as a cavalry scout, and his gradual movement into the lonely but independent life of a messenger and guide. "You have no family?" she asked as the fire died down to barely glowing embers. "Had a wife once," McKenna said quietly. "She died of fever the second winter after we were married. That was in Colorado, before I came south. And now you choose to be alone?" McKenna stared into the dying fire, considering the question. "I suppose I got used to it. Easier to move around, easier to avoid complications. A man alone makes his own choices and doesn't have to worry about putting others in danger. But also no one to share the good times," Ayanna observed. "No one to help when troubles come. Among my people, we say that a person alone is like a single arrow. It may fly straight, but it has no power against strong enemies. And what do you say about a bundle of arrows?" McKenna asked, sensing there was more to the analogy. "A bundle of arrows cannot be broken," she replied simply. "Together, they have strength that none possesses alone." McKenna found himself thinking about her words as they settled down for the night, taking turns keeping watch as was prudent in country where dangers could approach from any direction. During his watch, he found his eyes drawn repeatedly to the sleeping form of the Apache woman, wondering at the strange turn of events that had brought them together. When morning came, they broke camp efficiently and continued north towards Cedar Springs. The country gradually became less harsh as they traveled, with more grass and occasional patches of timber in the draws and valley bottoms. McKenna began to feel cautiously optimistic about their chances of reaching the trading post without further trouble. It was Ayanna who spotted the dust cloud first, rising from the south like a distant signal. McKenna studied it through his field glasses, counting the riders and trying to judge their direction and speed. 6 men, he reported grimly. "Coming hard this way. The ones who took me," Ayanna said with certainty. "They have found my trail." McKenna looked around quickly, assessing their options. They were in relatively open country, with little cover except for a rocky ridge about half a mile to the west. Their single horse, carrying double, could not outrun 6 mounted men on fresh horses. "We need to reach those rocks," he said, pointing toward the ridge. "It's our only chance." They pushed the sorrel mare as hard as they dared across the broken ground, but the pursuing riders were gaining rapidly. McKenna could see now that these were indeed the professional raiders Ayanna had described, well-mounted and heavily armed. They had spread out in a line as they approached, making escape in any direction increasingly impossible. The mares stumbled slightly as they reached the base of the rocky ridge, and McKenna knew they were not going to make it to the top before the raiders reached them. He pulled the horse to a halt behind a cluster of large boulders that offered some protection. "Can you handle a rifle?" he asked Ayanna as he pulled his Winchester from its scabbard. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. McKenna handed her the rifle and drew his Colt. "Stay down and don't waste shots. We need to make every bullet count." The raiders approached cautiously, having learned to respect McKenna's marksmanship during their earlier encounter. They took positions behind rocks and brush, beginning a careful advance that would eventually overwhelm the 2 defenders through sheer numbers and firepower. "You might as well give it up," called out a voice from the rocks below. "We've got you surrounded, and all we want is the woman. You can ride away from this." McKenna didn't bother to respond. He had seen what these men were capable of, and he knew they were not the type to leave witnesses alive. Beside him, Ayanna lay flat against the rocks, the Winchester steady in her hands as she watched for targets. The fight that followed was brief but intense. McKenna's first shot dropped one of the raiders from his horse, while Ayanna's careful aim wounded another. But the return fire was devastating, chips of stone flying from the rocks around them as rifle bullets searched for flesh. It was during a lull in the shooting that McKenna heard it, a sound that made his heart leap with hope. Hoofbeats, approaching fast from the north. Many hoofbeats. The cavalry patrol that crested the ridge consisted of 12 troopers, led by a young lieutenant who assessed the situation quickly and professionally. The raiders, caught between McKenna's position and the approaching soldiers, found themselves suddenly outnumbered and outgunned. The fight ended with 3 of the raiders dead, 2 wounded and captured, and 1 escaped into the broken country to the south. The cavalry lieutenant, an earnest young man named Morrison, listened to McKenna's account of events with interest and growing concern. These raiders have been operating across 3 territories, Morrison explained, as his men tended to the wounded and secured the prisoners. We've been tracking them for 2 weeks. McKenna looked at Ayanna, who had remained silent during his conversation with the cavalry officer. He could see the tension in her posture, the wariness in her eyes as she watched the soldiers. To her, they represented authority that had often been hostile to her people. The woman was their prisoner, McKenna told Morrison. I'm taking her to Cedar Springs to find someone who can help her get back to her people. Morrison studied Ayanna with professional interest. She speaks English? Yes, sir, Ayanna answered for herself, her voice steady despite the obvious stress of the situation. Good, Morrison said briskly. We'll need a statement from you about these raiders and their activities. Can you identify the men who attacked your camp? As Ayanna answered the lieutenant's questions, McKenna found himself admiring her composure under difficult circumstances. She provided clear, detailed information about the raid on her band's camp, the other captives who had been taken, and the movements of the raiding party over the past several days. This information is very valuable, Morrison told her when she finished. You may have helped us prevent other attacks. The cavalry patrol rode with them as far as the turnoff to Cedar Springs, providing security and allowing McKenna and Ayanna to travel the final distance to the trading post with confidence that they would not face further pursuit from the surviving raiders. As they approached the cluster of low buildings that made up Dutch Hendricks' trading post, McKenna felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had survived the immediate danger, but the more complex challenge of helping Ayanna find her way home still lay ahead. And despite her words of warning about the complications their association might create, he found himself reluctant to think about the moment when she would continue her journey without him. Dutch Hendricks emerged from his trading post like a man expecting trouble, his shotgun cradled casually in his arms. The weathered proprietor had survived 5 years in this remote location by developing an instinct for dangerous situations, and the sight of McKenna riding up with an Apache woman behind him clearly triggered every alarm bell in his experienced mind. McKenna, Dutch called out, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp and watchful. Interesting traveling companion you've picked up. It's a long story, Dutch, McKenna replied, dismounting and helping Ayanna down from the horse. She needs help getting back to her people. Dutch looked around the small cluster of buildings that made up his trading post, noting the various customers and workers who had stopped their activities to stare at the unusual pair. There were 3 Mexican traders examining some horse gear, 2 white prospectors restocking supplies, and a pair of Apache men who had been trading pelts but now stood frozen in surprise at seeing Ayanna. Well, Dutch said after a moment's consideration, I reckon we'd better talk inside. Rosa, he called to a Mexican woman who emerged from one of the smaller buildings. Take care of their horse, would you? The interior of Dutch's main building was a fascinating mixture of general store, saloon, and informal meeting hall. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to coffee to brightly colored cloth. A few rough tables and chairs provided seating for customers who wanted to drink or conduct business in relative comfort. Dutch gestured for McKenna and Ayanna to sit at a table in the back corner, away from the curious stares of the other customers. He produced a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses, pouring drinks for himself and McKenna while offering water to Ayanna. Now then, Dutch said, settling his substantial frame into a chair that creaked in protest. What's this all about? McKenna told the story efficiently, covering the rescue, the pursuit by raiders, and the assistance for the cavalry patrol. Dutch listened without interruption, his shrewd eyes moving between McKenna and Ayanna as he absorbed the details. Those Apache fellows out there, Dutch said when McKenna finished. You recognize either of them? Ayanna had been watching the two Apache men through the window, and she shook her head. They're not from my band, but perhaps they know of Gray Wolf, the old trader I mentioned. Gray Wolf? Dutch's eyebrows rose. Hell, I know Gray Wolf. Tough old bird. Honest as the day is long. Haven't seen him in about 2 months, though. He usually comes through here in late spring. Dutch paused, calculating. That's still a month away. McKenna felt something sink in his stomach. So we don't know where to find him. Well, now, I didn't say that. Dutch leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of whiskey. Those Apache boys out there might know where Gray Wolf is wintering. And even if they don't, they could probably guide the lady back to Apache territory if they're willing. Would they be willing? Ayanna asked quietly. Dutch considered the question carefully. That depends on a lot of things. Apache loyalty runs to family and band first, then to the broader tribe. You being from a different band complicates things. And traveling with a white man. He shrugged. Some would see that as suspicious, even if they understood the circumstances. What would you suggest? McKenna asked. Let me talk to them first, Dutch replied. Feel out their attitudes. Meanwhile, you two had better plan on staying here for at least a few days. Word's going to spread that there's an Apache woman at my post, and that's going to draw attention from all sorts of folks. Some helpful, some not so much. Dutch left them at the table and walked over to speak with the two Apache men. McKenna watched the conversation through the window, noting the animated gestures and serious expressions on all three faces. After several minutes, Dutch returned with a grim expression. Well, McKenna prompted. They know of your band, Dutch told Ayanna, and they know Gray Wolf. But they've got some strong opinions about the situation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They think you should have died fighting rather than allow yourself to be captured. And they think traveling with a white man makes you. He struggled for a diplomatic way to phrase it. Contaminated, Ayanna said calmly. Unclean. I understand their thinking. McKenna felt a flash of anger. That's ridiculous. She escaped from raiders and nearly died in the desert. What was she supposed to do? I'm not saying I agree with them, Dutch said quickly. I'm just telling you what they think. They're willing to trade information about Gray Wolf's location, but they won't guide her themselves. They say her own people must decide what to do with her. Ayanna absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though McKenna could see the pain in her eyes. Being rejected by members of her own tribe, even those from different bands, clearly hurt more than she was willing to admit. Where is Gray Wolf? She asked Dutch. According to them, he's about 60 miles northeast of here, camped near some hot springs. There's a small group of families with him, including some relatives of yours, if I understood correctly. McKenna looked at Ayanna. 60 miles isn't too bad. We can make it in 3 days, maybe 2 if we push hard. Dutch raised his eyebrows. You planning to escort the lady all the way home? The question hung in the air between them. McKenna realized he had been assuming he would continue to help Ayanna, but he had not really examined his motivations for doing so. Looking at her now, seeing the uncertainty and vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide, he knew he could not simply abandon her to make the final portion of her journey alone. Yes, he said simply. I'll see her safely to her people. Ayanna looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. This will bring you danger, McKenna. When my people see you, they may assume you are the one who captured me originally. Apache warriors do not always ask questions first. I'll take that risk. Dutch shook his head. You two are going to complicate each other's lives in ways you haven't even thought of yet. But it's your choice. He stood up. Meanwhile, you'll need supplies for the journey and a place to stay tonight. I got a small cabin out back that you can use. Separate rooms, he added quickly, noting the look on McKenna's face. The rest of the afternoon was spent preparing for the journey to find Gray Wolf. McKenna purchased additional supplies and ammunition while Ayanna helped Dutch's wife, Rosa, with various tasks around the trading post. The Mexican woman, kind-hearted and practical, took an immediate liking to Ayanna and insisted on providing her with new clothing to replace her torn and travel-stained dress. As evening approached, the trading post filled with its usual collection of travelers, traders, and local residents who came for news and social contact. McKenna found himself the subject of considerable attention and speculation, with various people approaching him to ask about his Apache companion and their plans. Most of the questions were merely